The wind carried the scent of rain, though the sky was clear. Dr. Mara Vance paused on the ridge above the valley. Below, the grass bent in a slow rolling wave as if something moved beneath it. Her field recorder hissed, then fell silent. A shadow crossed the sun for only a heartbeat, yet the shape burned into her mind. A wide frill horns like spear's eyes, dark and unblinking. She had studied fossils all her life, yet nothing prepared her for seeing one alive. Somewhere below, the Earth's past had broken free, and it was walking toward her. Mara Vance had always believed the prairies kept secret. From above, they looked endless and empty, yet each blade of grass covered a world of life and history. The early morning sun painted the horizon in gold as she stepped out her tent. Her small research camp sat on the edge of the Old Horn Valley in western Canada. A scattering of canvas shelters and equipment crates formed their base of operations. Beyond them, the land rolled into shallow hills dotted with ancient riverbeds and exposed stone. She had been here for 4 weeks with a team of 5. Their goal was simple on paper: map newly exposed fossil beds before the autumn rains returned. The work was slow and often dull. Most days were spent on their knees brushing away dirt from bones that would crumble if handled too roughly. Yet the location was famous among paleontologists. The valley's cliffs held a continuous record of life from the late Cretaceous. Ceratopsian fossils were common here, but rarely in good condition. That had been Mara's life for years, collecting fragments and trying to piece together creatures that had vanished 70 million years ago. Locals spoke of something else, though. The ranchers who grazed cattle on the far edges of the valley told stories of a beast that walked at night. They claimed to hear heavy steps in the dark and to find strange 3-toed tracks by their watering holes. Mara listened politely when they spoke, but her mind filed it away as folklore. People who live near wild places often invent wild things to explain what they cannot see. Still, there were oddities she could not ignore. Twice, she found fresh gouges in clay cliffs that looked like they had been made by something massive pressing through. On one occasion, their motion cameras captured a blur that was neither cow nor bison. It was tall, broad-shouldered, and the frame of its head seemed wider than its body. Her students dismissed it as a camera error, yet she watched the clip again and again. The land itself had a strange pull. At dawn, the air felt heavy as though the ground held its breath. The quiet was different from city quiet. Out here there was always the sound of wind, or an insect's wing, or the cry of a hawk. But sometimes that faded into an unnatural stillness. It was during one of those silences that she felt the faint tremor under her boots. Mara had grown up on stories of discovery. Her father had been a geologist and her mother a historian. They raised her on the idea that the past was never truly gone. Every rock, every bone, every artifact was a voice speaking from another age. Her life's work was to listen to those voices. Yet she had never expected one to speak in real time. Her team included Ian, the field engineer, who could fix anything with wire and tape. Jess was a fossil preparator whose patience exceeded anyone Mara had met. Peter was a young distiller in graduate school, eager to prove himself. Then there was Dr. Lang, veteran paleontologist and constant skeptic. Finally, they had Ahmed, the logistician, who kept the camp supplied and the people fed. It was a good team, but not one prepared for anything outside scientific routine. That morning, she studied the far ridge through her binoculars. The grass moved oddly, as if something large had passed minutes before. She thought of the rancher's words and of the shadow she had seen the day before. The shape had been clear in the sun, a wide frill and forward-pointing horns. A ceratopsian, but alive, not fossilized. Anchiceratops was known from fragmentary remains here, yet no complete skeleton had ever been found. She lowered the binoculars and felt the wind shift. For the first time, she considered the impossible. Maybe the valley was not only a graveyard. Maybe it was a sanctuary. The day began with cloudless skies and the sound of shovels biting into dry earth. Mara was in the trench cataloging vertebrae when Ian's voice cut through the stillness. He had been setting a motion camera near the east ridge, and now he waved his arms for her to come. She dusted her gloves on her pants and walked toward him, expecting another equipment fault. What she found instead made her stop mid-step. At the base of the slope was a footprint. It was deep, wide, and unlike anything she had seen outside a museum display. 3 blunt toes pressed into the soil with central pad impression almost the size of her head. The edges were sharp, meaning it had been made recently. Ian crouched beside it measuring, with a folding ruler, his face pale under the sun. "It is fresh," he said without looking up. "Maybe hours old." Mara knelt and ran her fingers along the packed earth. The size ruled out any modern animal in this region. Even bison left prints half as large. Her pulse quickened. She told herself it could be an elaborate prank, but no one had access to the site except their team. Peter jogged over with the small field drone slung across his shoulder. They launched it to scan the surrounding area. The camera rose into the sky, feeding live images to a tablet in Mara's hands. For a moment they saw nothing but grass and rock. Then the feed flickered, and something massive moved at the edge of the frame. It slipped between two hills out of sight, but its shape was clear enough to freeze everyone in place. Jess whispered what they were all thinking. That was not a cow. Dr. Lang arrived late to the gathering, shaking his head at their excitement. "You're seeing shadows in soil. Nothing more." Yet even he kept glancing at the screen as they replayed the footage. They decided to follow the trail. The footprint led them along a shallow gully where the grass was flattened in a straight path. Twice they found broken shrubs, and once a small tree bent almost aground, as if pushed aside. After half a kilometer, the trail vanished into an area of exposed stone. Without soil, there were no prints to follow. Ahmed called them back to camp before nightfall. The prairie was beautiful under moonlight, yet navigation was treacherous. Mara agreed, but her thoughts stayed on the ridge where the figure had vanished. That night the wind changed. It carried a low, distant sound that made her sit up in her cot. It was not the howl of a coyote or the call of an elk. This was deeper, a resonant bellow that seemed to vibrate in her ribs. She stepped outside. The stars shone bright the horizon, unbroken, except for one slow-moving shadow. At the far end of the valley, it lingered for seconds before fading into the darkness. She stood there long after it was gone. In her mind, a decision began to form. The expedition's purpose would change. They were no longer simply mapping fossils. They were tracking something alive. Something thought lost a history. In the morning, she called the team together. Ian listened with arms crossed. Jess's eyes lit with excitement. Peter grinned like a child about to open a present. Dr. Lang voiced his disapproval, but did not leave the circle. Ahmed asked the only practical question. What would they do if they found it? Mara looked toward the valley. We document it. We prove it exists. And we make sure it is safe from those who harm it. The mission was set without ceremony. The Anchiceratops was out there, and they would find it. The search began at dawn. Mara divided the valley into sectors, marking them on a weathered map pinned to the side of the supply tent. Each person was assigned a region with overlapping routes, so no area would be left unchecked. The prairie stretched in every direction under a pale morning sun. The grass shifted in restless waves as if hiding whispers. They carried drones, binoculars, and motion sensors. Ian had rigged a system of solar chargers to keep the equipment alive in the field. Jess took sample kits in case they found biological traces. Peter handled the drone controls while Mara led on foot. Dr. Lang walked with slow determination, muttering that the whole thing would end in wasted effort. Ahmed trailed behind, keeping radio contact clear. Their first day turned up little more than broken branches and disturbed earth. At times a wind carried a faint scent of damp soil and something animal, yet none of them could place it. By nightfall they were tired, but their resolve remained. The second day brought the first real sign. Near a dry riverbed, Jess found a half-chewed plant stalk the size of her forearm. The bite marks were deep and wide, spaced farther apart than any living grazer could manage. The stem was still moist, suggesting the feeding had happened within the last day. Mara stored it carefully in a sealed bag. Later that afternoon, Peter's drone picked up movement again. This time the shape lingered longer at the edge of a thicket. The image was blurred, yet they could see the outline of a broad frill and one forward curving horn. The head moved with deliberate slowness, scanning the air before the creature melted into the trees. They marked the spot on the map. It lay near the western boundary where the ground rose into rocky outcrops. That night the air grew still. Ahmed reported faint ground tremors around midnight. Mara lay awake listening. Once she heard a distant splash, as if something heavy stepped into water. The The sound carried through the valley, then faded. She wondered if the Anchiceratops drank under the cover of darkness and returned to shelter before sunrise. On the third day, the team reached the rocky western edge. The ground here was broken and uneven with gullies that dropped without warning. They found several large mounds of dung, half dried in the sun. The texture was fibrous, packed with fragments of ferns and conifer needles. Jess took samples while Peter photographed them from every angle. Dr. Lang finally spoke with a hint of awe. If this is what it appears to be, then we are looking at evidence no one else has seen in millions of years. They pressed on through narrow passes. The air here felt heavier and cooler. The rock walls bore long scrapes at shoulder height far above where a human could reach. The marks ran parallel, as if made by something brushing past repeatedly. Mara placed her palm against the grooves and felt how fresh they seemed. In the early afternoon, they reached a sheltered basin. Here the grass grew taller and greener, as if fed by a hidden spring. The silence was deep. Even the insects seemed absent. They fanned out, searching for signs. Ian found a series of shallow depressions in the grass, each about the size of a large shield. Resting spots, he guessed. Something big lay here and moved on. Peter pointed to the far side of the basin where the grass bent in a wide arc. That is not wind, he said. They moved slowly toward it, their steps careful. Then they heard it, a low, rumbling breath followed by the crunch of foliage. Mara froze. Between two stands of brush, a massive shape shifted. Sunlight caught the curve of a horn and the edge of a frill patterned in earthy browns and muted yellows. The head lifted, revealing an eye dark and reflective. For a moment, the Anchiceratops simply looked at them. Then, with a slow, deliberate step, it turned and vanished into the deeper brush. No one spoke until the sound of movement was gone. Jess's hands trembled. Peter looked as if he had forgotten to breathe. Dr. Lang pressed a hand to his brow, muttering about rewriting textbooks. They set up camp near the basin, despite the risk. Over the next 2 days, they observed from a distance. The creature returned each night to feed. It moved with surprising grace for its size. Its frill bore scars, and one horn was chipped near the tip. Mara noted every detail, sketching it by lantern light. This was not only proof of survival, but of adaptation. The Anchiceratops had endured unseen for countless generations. Challenges mounted quickly. Food supplies ran low, forcing Ahmed to make careful rationing choices. The drone struggled in the dense brush, and Ian spent hours repairing damaged rotors. Once a sudden storm swept through, flooding their tents and scattering equipment. Through it all, Mara pushed them forward. On the 5th day, they attempted to follow the Anchiceratops at dawn. The tracks led them deeper into a maze of rock and grass, where visibility dropped to a few meters. Twice they lost the trail, only to find it again marked by crushed plants. Then they reached a cliff edge and looked down into a hidden valley, lush and untouched. Herds of smaller animals moved below, antelope and elk perhaps, but near the center stood the unmistakable form of their quarry. It grazed calmly, unaware of their presence. Mara knew this was more than a discovery. This was an ecosystem preserved by isolation. If they revealed it carelessly, it could draw hunters and poachers. The team agreed to keep the location secret until they could secure protection for the area. They spent the next days documenting from afar. At night, they heard the deep calls echoing through the cliffs. Once Mara glimpsed a second, smaller Anchiceratops near the larger one, suggesting a breeding pair. This raised the stakes even higher. The survival of the species might hinge on these few individuals. But danger was close. On the 7th day, Peter spotted tire tracks far from any road. Someone else was searching. The team debated whether to move the camp, but Mara decided to stay. If outsiders found the valley, first they could lose everything. The next morning, the tension broke. Gunshots cracked in the distance, scattering birds into the air. The Anchiceratops bellowed an alarm, and the sound rolled like thunder. Mara grabbed her pack and ran toward the noise. Ian and Jess followed. They reached the ridge overlooking the hidden valley, just as 2 figures moved through the brush carrying rifles. Mara's heart pounded. She knew the rising action was over. The confrontation was about to begin. Mara dropped to her knees at the ridge edge, her eyes locked on the 2 armed men moving through the grass below. One was tall, broad-shouldered with a scarf around his neck, the other lean, and quick, scanning the area with sharp movements. The tall one, carried a long rifle fitted with a scope. Their boots left deep impressions in the soil, leading straight toward the feeding Anchiceratops. The creature stood unaware, grazing on the tall grass, its massive frill catching the sunlight. It was a picture of prehistoric strength and calm, but Mara knew that calm would shatter with a single gunshot. Ian crept up beside her, his breathing fast. "We cannot let them fire," he whispered. Jess crawled up from the other side, holding her camera. "If we can get proof of them and turn it over to the authorities." She stopped as a lean man raised his arm, pointing toward the Anchiceratops. The tall man knelt, bracing the rifle against his shoulder. Mara's heart pounded so hard it drowned out the rustle of grass. She slid down the slope, without thinking, moving low and fast. Rocks bit into her palms as she scrambled forward. She heard Ian curse and follow. Jess stayed on the ridge, aiming her lens at the poachers. The rifle cracked. A burst of dust leapt from the ground near the creature's front foot. The Anchiceratops jerked back, tossing its head with a sharp bellow. Birds exploded from the brush in every direction. The tall man chambered another round, but Mara was already on him. She slammed into his side, knocking the barrel upward. The shot went high, vanishing into the cliffs. The lean man lunged forward, swinging the butt of his rifle toward her. Ian intercepted, grabbing the weapon and wrenching it away. The two crashed to the ground, grappling. Mara and the tall man struggled for control of the rifle. He was stronger, but she had surprise. With a sharp twist, she kicked his knee, sending him sprawling. The Anchiceratops bellowed again, a deep sound that shook the air. It took several steps back, then swung its massive head toward the commotion. The frill flared, its horns lowered. Mara realized the danger. If it charged, they would all be in its path. "Back off," she shouted to Ian. He shoved the lean man away, and both poachers stumbled toward the brush. The tall one cursed, spitting in the dirt. "You think you can stop us? That thing is worth millions." Mara kept herself between them, and the valley, her chest heaving. "You do not own it. You will never touch it again." The tall man started forward, but froze as a shadow fell over him. The Anchiceratops had moved closer, its eye fixed on the strangers. With a snort, it pawed the ground, sending clods of soil into the air. The tall man took a step back, his bravado faltering. The lean one turned and bolted without a word. The tall man followed a moment later, crashing through the brush until the sound of their retreat faded. For a long moment, no one moved. The Anchiceratops stood breathing hard, its head still low. Mara raised her hands, palms open. "Easy," she murmured, though she knew it could not understand. The creature watched her, then lifted its head and turned away, walking back toward the hidden valley. Each step was steady, deliberate, as if it had decided she was no threat. Ian joined her on the slope, his shirt torn, his face streaked with sweat. Jess emerged from the ridge above, still clutching her camera. "I got everything," she said, her voice shaking. "The shots, the faces, the entire fight." Mara nodded, her gaze following the retreating Dinosaur until it vanished into green basin below. Relief washed over her, but it was tempered by the reality of what had just happened. Someone else knew this place existed. Word could spread faster than they could stop it. Ahmed and Dr. Lang arrived moments later, breathless from a climb. Ahmed took one look at the scene and said nothing. Dr. Lang stared at the empty ridge, his jaw tight. "We will need more than footage to keep the secret safe," he said. Mara agreed. The poachers would return with reinforcements or sell the location. The team's mission had changed once again. It was no longer only about documenting the Anchiceratops. Now it was about protecting it. They gathered their gear quickly, knowing time was short. Jess backed up her footage onto 2 drives. Ian rigged the drones for constant aerial watch. Ahmed checked the radios for any intercepted chatter. Mara stood on the ridge one last time, looking over the valley. Somewhere down there, the Anchiceratops grazed, unaware of the danger that still lingered beyond the rocks. She clenched her fists. They had won this fight, but the war to save the creature had only begun. The valley lay quiet again, though the silence felt different now. It was no longer the untouched peace they had first encountered, but a fragile pause after a storm. Mara could not shake the thought of the poachers regrouping somewhere beyond the ridges. Every shadow in the distance seemed like a watcher. The team returned to camp in a tense silence. Ian set the drones into a patrol pattern over the western ridge. Jess huddled in the communications tent, transferring her footage to cloud storage through a secure satellite link. Ahmed double-checked the food stock and loaded emergency packs in case they needed to leave at short notice. Dr. Lang paced near the fire, lost in thought. Night fell with a cold wind sweeping through the grass. The sound of it against the tent walls felt almost like whispered warnings. They kept the fire low to avoid being spotted from afar. In the distance, the deep bellow of the Anchiceratops echoed once, then faded. Mara listened to it like a heartbeat in the dark. That sound reminded her why they were here and what they stood to lose. Over a late meal, they discussed their options. Jess suggested contacting the nearest wildlife authority, but Ahmed warned that official channels could be slow and leaky. Ian proposed moving camp deeper into the cliffs to shield their location. Dr. Lang finally spoke with rare conviction. We must do both. Hide ourselves and alert someone we can trust. By morning, the decision was made. They would split the team. Mara, Ian, and Ahmed would remain to watch the valley. Jess and Dr. Lang would make the difficult trek east to find a ranger station that might help. Jess carried the video evidence on 2 separate drives, each in waterproof casing. Dr. Lang carried a map with the valley's position marked in a simple code. Before leaving, Jess took one last look from the ridge. The Anchiceratops was visible far below, moving slowly among the tall grass. We will keep it safe, Mara promised. Jess nodded and began to climb down the eastern slope. The days that followed were a strain. Without Jess's extra eyes and Dr. Lang's cautious counts of the camp felt smaller. Ian kept the drones running, but battery degradation forced him to rotate them. Ahmed remained alert with a radio always at hand. Mara spent long hours at the ridge glassing the valley with binoculars. She noticed the Anchiceratops changing its routine, feeding earlier in the day and resting near the basin's far wall as if sensing danger. On the 4th day after the confrontation, Ian spotted movement near the western ridge. A small dust trail wound through the grass too fast for grazing animals. Mara's pulse quickened. The drones confirmed a lone motorbike weaving between the rocks. The rider wore a scarf like the tall poacher. He stopped near the same ridge they had defended days earlier, then turned back without crossing. It was a scout. That night, Mara gathered the others. They know we are still here, she said. They are waiting. Ahmed suggested moving into the valley to guard the Anchiceratops directly, but Mara refused. If we bring human scent too close, we could drive it away. This is its home, not ours. On the 7th night, a message came through on the satellite radio. Jess's voice cracked with static, but the words carried hope. They had reached the ranger station and found someone willing to listen. The footage had been sent to a secure network for review. Help was coming, though no exact time could be given. Relief mixed with unease. They had stirred something bigger than a single hunt. If officials came too late, the Anchiceratops might vanish again, or worse, fall to another bullet. The following dawn, Mara stood on the ridge as the first light touched the valley. The Anchiceratops emerged from the basin, its frill glowing gold in the sunrise. It paused, lifting its head as if smelling the wind. For a moment, it seemed to look straight at her. She felt the weight of everything that had happened pressing on her shoulders, yet also a fierce clarity. They had risked their lives and would keep risking them, because some things were worth more than safety or comfort. The creature turned and moved deeper into the grass, leaving only the sway of plants in its wake. Mara lowered her binoculars, knowing the next step would decide everything. The rumble of engines reached camp just before noon. Mara grabbed her field glasses and climbed the ridge. Through the shimmering heat, she saw 2 green trucks, winding slowly toward the valley from the eastern slope. Their roofs bore the white markings of the Ranger Service. Relief surged through her, though she did not lower her guard. Behind them, a larger covered vehicle followed, carrying supplies and perhaps more people. Ian jogged up beside her, grinning. Looks like Jess came through. They descended to meet the newcomers. Jess jumped from the first truck, her hair wind-blown, her face streaked with dust, but her eyes bright. Dr. Lang followed, shaking hands with the lead ranger, a tall woman named Captain Quiros, who wasted no time in getting to the point. We received your evidence, Quiros said. Your poachers are known to us. They have been smuggling exotic wildlife for years. The footage you sent was enough to secure an immediate deployment. She glanced toward the valley. I will be honest. I did not believe this creature still existed until I saw the prints on the way here. Mara led them to the ridge and pointed out the grazing Anchiceratops in the basin. Even from this distance, its size and form left the rangers in stunned silence. For a moment, there were no words, only the sound of wind over grass. Kiro spoke again more softly. We will set up a perimeter. No one gets near without clearance. This place will be listed as a restricted zone. Over the next 2 days, the camp transformed. Portable towers rose at the ridgeline. Drones patrol with better range than Ian's units. Supply crates formed barricades at choke points. The rangers worked efficiently, but with a quiet reverence for what they were guarding. Mara watched them adapt to the valley's rhythm, making sure their presence caused as little disturbance as possible. Jess handed Mara a fresh copy of the footage now officially logged. "This is for your record," she said. "You earned it." Mara accepted it, knowing the images could ignite public interest, but also spark danger. She locked it in a waterproof case inside her tent. The Anchiceratops remained cautious yet unthreatened. It shifted its grazing areas, avoiding the noise of machinery, but never strayed beyond the basin. Mara took that as a sign. They had done enough to protect it for now. On the 3rd night after the rangers' arrival, a storm swept across the valley. Lightning lit the cliffs in jagged flashes. Rain hammered the tents, turning the ground to mud. In one blinding moment, Mara saw the Anchiceratops standing in the open, its frill glistening under the downpour. It looked timeless, untouched by the chaos of human conflict. She felt an ache of gratitude for being here to witness it. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air clear and sharp. Captain Kiros called a final meeting. "We will maintain a rotation here for as long as necessary," she said. "Your team is welcome to stay or withdraw. You have done more than anyone to ensure the species survives." Mara looked at Ian Ahmed Jess and Dr. Lang. Each wore the same tired but satisfied expression. "We will stay for a while," she said. "There is more to learn, and this is where we belong." Jess smiled. "Besides, someone has to make the documentary when the time is right." Dr. Lang adjusted his glasses. "And someone has to make sure the science is sound." Ian simply patted the drone control unit at his side. "And someone has to keep watch." As the sun dipped low, casting the valley in warm gold, Mara took one last walk along the ridge. Below, the Anchiceratops moved through the grass, a living link to a world thought lost. She understood now that this was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a long guardianship. For the first time since she had seen the shadow cross the sun, on that first day, she felt the weight on her chest ease. The valley was no longer unprotected. The Anchiceratops had a chance, and that was enough.